It's so
Yeah.
heavy if you think about it.
Yeah.
On one level, all of that shame and what
Mm-hmm.
they, it's heavy stuff cutting
Mm-hmm.
through
Mm-hmm.
the societal baggage,
Mm-hmm.
with our bodies, with queerness,
Yeah.
with identity,
Mm-hmm.
and then coming
Mm-hmm.
back to that word pleasure,
Yeah.
and how can pleasure be in service of awakening?
Yeah.
Years and years under the master's will. Years and years of hurting each other.
Welcome to the Spirit Underground podcast with Dharma teachers Spring Washam and Lama Rod Owens. These conversations will include topics on Black liberation theology, healing with plant-based medicine, indigenous wisdom, Buddhist-based meditation practices, and reconnecting to our ancestral knowledge. Together we will explore what freedom means individually, collectively, and spiritually. If you would like to support the Spirit Underground podcast, please visit the BeHereNowNetwork.com/donate. All right, welcome back, everybody. This is the Spirit Underground Conversations on Liberation with Lama Rod and myself, Spring Washam. And this is part 2 of a very juicy, I would say, and pain-filled and traumatic, and everything is there with this conversation on sexuality. I don't think anything is left out of this conversation. So this is our part 2.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think the thing too is, I don't know. I think everyone's in different places around, exploring, exploring sexuality, healing the trauma and the pain, right, from sexuality, or the ways in which our sexuality has been abused, right? And we're definitely healing from the ways in which we have actually abused and manipulated other people's expressions, sexual expression, sexuality, erotic embodiments, and so forth. Um, so I think, yeah, as you say, it's like, yeah, it's filled with a lot, right? And at the same time, it doesn't need to be filled with a lot. I just think that we don't, many of us weren't raised with the capacity to really talk about our sexuality within our families and our communities, and definitely, within like maybe the general cultures that many of us grew up in. Like it was very different, right? And of course, these other factors come into play, particularly factors from, patriarchy, which comes in and begins to um like dictate, like who has a right to do what, and who gets to embody what, and whose pleasure is more important than others, right? But patriarchy is, essentially control, right? It's like, let's control this, let's oversimplify it so that, things can be easily contained and channeled, into really the benefit of, a small group of people, or whomever a system, identifies as being powerful, and worthy, to, I don't know, control others, to put it simply.
Right, right. So we start there,
Yeah.
that we're all kind of under this program. We're sort of in
Yeah.
this spell, and where everyone's trying to break out of it
Yeah.
and to find this freedom in our bodies and to
Mm-hmm.
reclaim something.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the part where it gets a little dangerous, because you have a little awareness, you have
Yeah.
some power,
Yeah.
you feel, and then you have this dedication to your spiritual path. I mean, ultimately, all of us that are on a spiritual path, we sort of all follow the doctrine, cause no harm, do no harm, right? We're trying to be conscious of ourselves. We're trying. We say trying, but I think most of the people I know, we're trying actively not to use our sexuality
Right.
to abuse others,
Right. Well, I don't know. Like,
Oh,
I mean, I think that, we start, using terms like, spiritual and what the purpose of a particular spiritual path is. I think it gets really kind of complex, you know. There's that, and there's another piece too that you offered as well around, okay, we all want to embody like healthy sexuality, but it's more than that as well. It's not just me embodying a healthy expression, of my sexual self, right? But it's also how do I negotiate that embodiment with others because I am living with others, right? And
right.
I am trying to, I mean, in a way, work collaboratively with others, right? To get my needs around pleasure met in the same way others are trying to do that with others around them or with me and so forth, right? So I think there is those two pieces. I think get real heavy. Is like how do I figure out who I am, right? And how do I negotiate what I think is an authentic expression of who I am with others as I share space with them, and as I am attempting to collaborate with them in order to experience something, pleasurable and healing and whole, you know. Um, so there's that too. And then just going back to the previous, just around like spirituality and the goal of spirituality, I just think that, you know, sometimes it's not so much about it's not so much with other paths about, do no harm, but it's about what does balance mean? When I think about other traditions of spiritual practice, particularly Afro Caribbean, traditions, right? And I want to, talk a little more, closely towards like hoodoo, and more of these, kind of African American or Black American magic traditions. Um, like so much about these paths are really about balance. It's like, how do we bring things back into balance? And sometimes to bring things back into balance means that there is harm that happens, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we don't really talk about that often, you
Well, you have such
know?
a unique way of that's one of your gifts is your unique way of describing these things. Because I don't think people would say that word balance, but
Well,
you
yeah,
know, I know what you mean, like
right.
resonance or something.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
just read and study and talk to people, who are like really rooted in these traditions. It's just conversations and study and reading, and that's how I kind of start thinking like this, But yeah, I mean, and this is not to say, that this conversation that we're having, more situated within Dharma and Buddhism, tantric practice, right? We're not saying that like part of this practice is about creating harm, intentionally,
Absolutely.
but it's
Mhm.
really about how do we widen and expand and really get into the complexities, of what it means to live with people who maybe sometimes are crossing boundaries, creating harm for you, and how do you respond to that? you know um
Right.
it's just
And
these
that's
just
where it gets
considerations. Yeah,
complicated,
yeah,
we'll say. And I mean, I
mhm,
think your unique way of saying this like negotiation.
right.
I never heard it is though, right? It's like it is, but you don't really hear that like, okay, we're in a community and
Yeah,
and I just came to Atlanta and
right.
we're going to be launching a community and we have to all negotiate
Mhm.
our bodies
Yes.
together and also, it's a negotiation of power. Some
Yes.
have power over others in
Yep,
some way,
yep,
at least
yep,
relative on the relative level,
yep.
and then like how do they negotiate?
Mhm, mhm.
And it feels like everybody's negotiating
Mm.
from a different perspective or a different
Yes.
place.
Exactly. Because there's power imbalance, hierarchies, status play, right? And so some people may think they're negotiating, but they're actually dominating and taking up a lot of space. And some people actually don't know what negotiation is because they have been taught to compromise what they need
Yes.
to get out of the way for other people's needs.
Yes, or
Right.
acquiesce in some
Yeah.
form or fashion. Their conditioning, their trauma.
And and power will always be. Power is power. you know, like power is energy. This energy that's directed, manipulated, channeled, right? So that's always going to be there. But what I'm really interested in terms of community is how do we practice being in power with ourselves and being in power with others? Not being
Right.
in power over or being in power under, but being in power with. And that means that we name like our agency, or also our lack of agency as well. Like we name the state of our agency in the moment and what we feel we're taking up space around or taking up too much space around or what we're compromising around. So
Compromising.
another way just to put it is just like, how are my needs being met, right? And whose needs seem more important than mine, right? And have all of my needs been met? And why have my needs been met? Or vice versa, why haven't my needs been met and why haven't they've been met? Maybe I just said that twice, but you know, power is just a huge piece, of this puzzle, right? That we're trying to work out. Um, and we all deserve to have our needs met. And this is why I use the word negotiation, because maybe it's not that I get all of my needs met all at once, but I'm in conversation around the ways in which I feel that I can gather the resources that I need, while also maybe helping others gather resources or maybe getting out of the way, of people gathering their resources. But it goes back to like also naming what we need as
Which is
well.
revolutionary. I've never once
Yeah.
heard any spiritual community sit down and go, what are our needs for pleasure? What are our needs for how are we negotiating this?
Yeah.
What are the leaders feeling? What are this is so beyond, people just show up with their program patterns, the power
Mhm.
structure, and they're at the sort of mercy.
Yeah.
In a way, the leader dictates the norms, the rules, and does all the negotiating
I
often on
mean, that's
behalf.
a cult.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
a
But people could say, and I think for all the
Mhm.
listeners to listen to the first talk,
Yeah.
because we were
Yeah.
talking about Hillsong Church.
Oh,
We were
yeah.
talking about all these leaders from Christian, from every tradition,
And in our tradition, the Karmapa as
Exactly. There's
well.
no Hindu yoga
My teacher,
community.
I mean, all of my male teachers have been a part of misuse and harming around sexuality.
And
All of my
really,
all of
yes.
my male teachers now. Except well, I won't put any more names out there, but I was gonna put one more name out there, but like
Right.
let me just hold it. For a while.
Well, it's
Yeah.
not hard to find. I'll tell you
No.
that. It's on the
No.
front page of all the page. This is front page news
Yeah.
in all these communities. So it can be for a lot of people who are healing.
Mhm.
Let me think about
Yeah.
this in a couple ways and
Okay.
why I was so interested. First, reading your new book, The New
Right.
Saints, which is coming out. I'm so excited. And your own personal disclosure triggered so
Mhm.
many beautiful reflections and thoughts and pain and
It
tears.
wasn't beautiful at the beginning.
It was beautiful throughout. I just didn't know
Right.
where I was going with my
Right.
own
Right.
process with it,
Right. Yeah.
because being in communities and being leaders and
Yeah.
trying to negotiate and, being a community that's healing the trauma and that's trying to offer liberation.
Mhm.
Um, pathways and
Yeah.
practices. What are these? These are new. These are, I feel like these practices that we want to do are obviously they're probably ancient, but they're new to this world. They're new in this form, and I know a lot of people have been asking me about this. What do I do? Do I be monogamous?
Right.
There's so much non-monogamy that's really popular right now. All these different kinds of ways of being together.
Right.
Um,
And let's bookmark that one.
yeah,
And
we'll
continue.
bookmark that one because I'm not sure about those. Right? There's a lot of suffering. Let's have a fivesome, and then the pain happens. And the confusion. It sounds like a good idea. So here we are trying to heal, liberate, embody,
Yeah.
and and cut through to what is the deepest truth.
Yeah. And the deepest truth is my most authentic holistic self. Myself uncensored, unpoliced. And a lot of us don't know what that feels like to not be policed, right? Or
Say more.
censored. Well, yeah, I mean, we all kind of grow up and we're told how to be, and when I used to teach, sexuality and dharma, in different centers, I used to I used to call the sessions practicing unsafe dharma. 'Cause I do love a wordplay, I tell you, but
exactly. That's what I was saying. You
a
named
little
these
catchy
things.
title. Like when practicing, when I would do this work with sanghas, right? It's you get into this place where people, using meditation, right, using some of these deep intuitive tools that we practice in the tradition, people for the first time start realizing that they didn't choose necessarily to be the person that was sitting in front of me. They realized that they just kind of were told, you know, where to be and how to act and who they were, and they just kind of consented to that. And we all do, right? Because that's the pressure of what it means to live in a collective. We're forcing each other, we're influencing each other to be certain ways, right? And so I mean, I would sit with people who were for the first time beginning to name, experiences of queerness, right? Experiences of gender expansion, and so forth, because no one had ever gave them permission
Right.
to explore, to be creative, to have experiences, right? To actually figure out who you were. And that's something that I have found extremely important for me, during my years, in the practice. It's I have a right to explore, I have a right to experiment, right? With myself. I give consent to myself to explore myself.
Absolutely.
And
Yes.
then when we're, wanting to explore with others, we gain that consent, enthusiastic consent, with others to explore. And that's, I mean, both of these are really important, but we think that exploring and investigating and having these experiences with others is the goal, but really it begins with ourselves. I have to figure out who I am. I have to figure out what I find pleasurable, and for me, and pleasure is just this really awakening energy, this experience of space, right? And a lot of people don't have that for various reasons that we've been talking about, since the last episode, but a lot of folks, again, we've been put into places and we stick there until something nudges us. There's a jolt,
Right.
and that can be really disorienting. You're selling alone, you're selling along, in this identity, you think you know who you are, what you're doing, who you're attracted to, and all of a sudden there's something that comes along.
Wham, you're in love with your best friend who's a
Yeah.
woman, right?
Right. Right.
So many people are finding themselves in these
Yeah.
attractions and relationships, and there is something beautiful about
Yeah.
something lifting where you can
Yeah.
just be authentic.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you can own it. But it's so interesting. I just want to not
Mhm.
bookmark, but explore a little bit
Uh-huh.
about, even when you say the word pleasure,
Uh-huh.
it's like it just feels so dangerous, doesn't
Oh,
it?
yeah. Isn't it dangerous?
Why though? I mean, it's just hitting me. It's like, okay, we want to engage because of pleasure,
Yeah.
even though we're sometimes pulled by habit or desire,
Yeah.
and intense
Mhm.
desire doesn't feel pleasurable. We know that's suffering,
Mm.
this kind of grasping, clinging.
Yeah.
Or maybe I'm just
Maybe.
weaving that in as, with pleasure, but
Yeah.
it feels like to reclaim the word pleasure is like,
Yeah.
ooh, we're on dangerous ground.
Yeah.
It's like,
Mhm.
how is pleasure liberatory? People
Yeah.
still think suffering is liberatory. I mean, that's
Right. Right.
that's
Right.
the world we're in. That's the paradigm, right?
Yes. Yes and no. It's always complicated with me. I'm just like
That's why I love
I'm
it.
always I'm always like, sure, but there's this other thing. But yeah, I think it's, you know, all these questions, right, are really rooted in the ways that we've been like, and I don't want to say indoctrinated, but it really is about indoctrination, the ways in which we have been influenced, right? Like I think it's always important to just kind of name where you're coming from, as we did in the past, in the first episode of the series. But, just to say that, yeah, I was like raised as a, cisgender man, right? And that kind of identity location, cisgender is this identity location that I, openly with full awareness, um, kind of situate myself in, right? But I don't feel at this point that this is limiting for me, at all. So I say all that to say that, like, this is my perspective, right? That, like, as a queer cisgender,
Yes.
Black, fat, mixed class, all of that, like all of this impacts how we're taught to relate to our sexuality, the permission that we get to embody sexuality, and, to embody fluid, open, expansive, sexuality, right? And there's not this one place we're trying to get to, right? But it's really this personal experience of like freedom, fluidity, openness, like, but what you were just really raising, about the fear is, I think, rooted again in shame. Like
There's
and
somehow
that's,
to experience
yeah,
pleasure is shameful, or to
yeah.
have a
I mean, that's the one thing that I have really worked hard to move through. The bulk of is like, it's the shame, like it's the fear of not getting what I need because I am embodying something that people don't understand, right? Or that embodiment is somehow like disrupting the comfort of others. And so shame arises as this weapon that keeps me in line, that keeps me from asking questions, you know? I mean, I've had experiences, this work has been really intense, for most of my life, and I'm in a certain, I think, pretty fluid, liberated space, right? Maybe that doesn't seem so fluid and liberating looking at me, but I feel like really free and happy, you know. But I have been with other cisgender men whom I was like their first, you know, relationship with another man, right?
Mhm.
And I've seen like that shift, into like considering queerness and the pain and the shame that arises from like, one day you're like, okay, I'm like this straight cisgender identified dude. And then the next day I have these feelings for this guy, and you start exploring it. And then it may be going well for like a little bit, but then the shame, the cultural conditioning starts
Absolutely.
arising. And that's always been really painful for me to move through with a partner,
Absolutely.
where this
Watching
is
them
brand new.
contract into that state is
Yeah,
devastating on some level.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I talk about that in New Saints too. That's one of the stories actually that
Mhm.
I offered. I don't want to talk like too detailed about it because this is about actual people, but
Right.
it's like you're just like, you think things are going well, then all of a sudden there's a shutting down, and you're like, why are you shutting down? And then you begin to
Mm.
understand that this process of coming out is something that you've been doing for decades. you know, like
Right.
you've been working on this, and moving through the pain, the trauma, right, of being out. And then there's someone that you're partnering with that you're developing deep feelings for who's just beginning to do this work, and you're like the same age. And you're like, okay, like, how do you survive that? And I haven't, by the way. I haven't survived it,
Yeah.
Um, so that, and then I say all that too to say, I don't want to say I'm not blaming anyone for anything. Like we all are struggling through the violence of conditioning and policing around our bodies and sexuality, obviously, you know. Um, but so I understand that work, but I don't know if it's my work to really be in a relationship with someone who's just beginning to do this labor
It's
for
because it's so
themselves.
heavy. It's so
Yeah,
heavy if you think about it. On
yeah.
one level, all of that shame and what
Mhm,
they, it's heavy stuff cutting
mhm,
through
mhm,
the societal baggage,
mhm.
with our bodies, with queerness,
Yeah,
with identity,
mhm,
and then coming
mhm.
back to that word pleasure,
Yeah,
and then how can pleasure be in service of awakening?
yeah,
How does
yeah.
this,
Mhm,
yeah, how does our freedom,
mhm.
yes, for the person that you are now, you definitely
Yeah.
someone who has spent as much time comfortable with who they are. You're so
Mhm,
comfortable with who you are and your spirit and who you love and what you're doing. I love that about you. So yeah, somebody that can meet you
mhm.
is, yeah, to kind of go through the beginning stages of
Yeah,
healing all the shame and the
yeah,
heaviness is a lot for you to hold. And it's a lot for all of us on
yeah.
another level to hold.
Mhm,
It's like, how do we create practices
mhm,
that
mhm.
support this unburdening?
Yeah.
How do
I'll
we
tell
do
you
that? I
I'll
wonder.
tell you what, friends,
Mhm.
like your people, your friends, your chosen family. I mean, like, friends have been critical, not necessarily family.
Mhm.
Like I think many of us like have to take a break from our families when we're beginning this
Mhm.
this work,
Yeah,
you
if they're
know?
not supportive, if they don't
Yeah,
understand and they're operating in that paradigm of
yeah,
shame and contraction.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Like I remember this one crucial moment, and I don't remember if I disclose this in Love and Rage or if it's in New Saints. Like, you get to a point where you just forget what you wrote in these books, even if it hasn't even dropped yet. Like, you're just like, "Wait, did I tell that story?" Because you have all these editors and people looking over manuscripts, and you think you put something in, they take it out. Anyway, I'm just gonna tell the story. But I was in college my freshman year and was in, like the big student, lounge, and I was with 2 friends, 2 women, um, one my age, one a little older, and these guys were walking through the lobby, and they were like, I think like a sports team, or they just come from, like, sports practice, but, like, these, big, tall, beautiful men, and I had already started coming out before my freshman year in college. I had started at the end of my senior year, in college. I do tell those stories. I do remember those stories in the books. But I just kind of looked up at these guys, and I um, made some kind of like, oh, they're like really hot. And like as I was getting the word hot out, which was the end of the sentence, all this really intense shame kind of like, just kind of like came from no. It literally felt like my body was contracting and like folding in on itself. Like I just felt like just really just contracting, shrinking, like really intensely. And my two friends saw that, you know? And then one of my friends was like, "No, Rod, it's okay. You can say that." You
Yes.
know? And that was like the most pivotal moment. One of the most pivotal moments in my, kind of coming out and around my embodiment of desire was like I was with people who were just like, "No, like you're being yourself around us. It's okay to
Right.
talk about your attraction
And to like accept
other men."
yourself.
And to
Yeah. And to
accept. They just
accept that was there.
they accepted me. And they were like,
Mhm.
and I don't know if it were different, if they would have been like, "Oh my God, that's disgusting. How dare you say that?" I think that would have been extremely harmful for me.
Yeah.
But like this is why I talk about friends, like supportive, loving friends who are holding you, who are taking care of you, right? I wouldn't be here without friends. The friends who we allowed each other to show up. Like that's the permission that we gave. And living, for a lot of years and like, organizing communities, radical activist communities, that was something that like we took very seriously. Like we wanted people to show up, we wanted people to be themselves, right? We wanted
Mhm.
people to name their desires, their pleasure, right? Because we wanted people to be whole. Like we wanted
Yes,
people.
yeah, not hiding
Yeah,
veils, this,
hiding.
like, hiding,
Yeah.
we hide from others and ourselves, yeah.
You can't do full liberation work if you're hiding.
Mm.
Like if you're running away from yourself, because that's gonna create harm in the long run. Like
Or
because freedom.
repression, and
Yeah,
that is harm, a
repression.
kind of internal repression, right?
Yeah. Because if we're talking about freedom and liberation, we're talking about freedom.
And we're
You
talking
know?
about everything on this path has to
Yeah.
be dealt with. There's
Yeah.
no you can't everybody you cannot compartmentalize
Yeah.
anymore. You
Yeah.
can't be one thing at your spiritual community and then at home you're different, then at work you're different and you have all these people these expressions have to meet. All
Yeah.
of your sides have to meet and we really do have to go into the shadows of where we
Yeah.
are afraid and where we feel deepest shame. We have to be willing
Mm.
to face that and go into
Yeah.
that, and it's excruciating.
Yeah.
I think shame, okay, I just
Yeah.
wanna say,
Okay.
is the worst feeling
Yeah.
because
Mhm.
it's almost like you just hide. You just something
Yeah.
I don't even know how to describe that feeling, but it's just
Mhm.
as you wanna just disappear.
Mhm.
You're something feels so terrible. It's like a mix of feeling like you've done something wrong or you're wrong, the situation's wrong. And I just remember
Yeah.
when I was feeling my deepest periods of shame were related to sexuality on retreats,
Mhm.
reminiscing about old things that I had done that weren't skillful and then reliving it. And I just remember also being in the dining room.
Mhm.
I was at Insight Meditation Society and I was just like reliving, it also was like being Black, being a
Mhm.
woman. And,
Mhm.
there's so much burden on that, just being in a Black body. Then you add a woman's body. It's deeply shameful. I mean, look what goes on. Your woman's body, everyone projects onto. And
Mhm.
I just remember I had this hoodie on and
Mhm.
I would just pull it lower and lower. And then I
Yeah.
would curl up. I couldn't even lift for days. I couldn't lift my head up.
Mhm.
I was just filled
Mhm.
with so much shame as I was reliving,
Mhm.
and I didn't know what was going on. I didn't
Right.
have words for it.
Yeah.
But I just know that feeling is just so bad.
Yeah.
It's just so
It's worse.
painful,
Yeah.
just excruciating. I just
Yeah.
want to name that for people as we try to unveil this and we feel this deep shame about who we
Mhm.
are, our
Mhm.
bodies, our pleasure, our
Yeah.
desires. And, we might have to go
Yeah.
through similar processes of sort of
Mhm.
feeling our way through. It will end.
Mhm.
It's a
Mhm.
temporary state. I was, after some
Yeah.
days it passed, but wow, it was really heavy and really, really
Yeah.
painful.
It's temporary if you do the work
Yeah,
to
if you're
take
willing to
care
be
of it,
present.
but not like hide it away or push it away, then it just gets even worse, right? Because there's a cost there,
Mm.
right? Like, as James Baldwin and just in general, like James Baldwin, has been so incredible for me in terms of like trying to understand what a liberated identity,
Yes.
well, liberated blackness, right, in America, like what that means, what it costs, the work and the labor that goes in. Of course, also being another black gay man, right? That was also really important for me. He was important for me as a mentor. I mean, I didn't know James Baldwin in life, but like just his work mentored me, through this really rough development. But the thing with shame too, it's, you know, to disrupt the places that we've been put means that there are going to be consequences, right? And sometimes it's really hard we lose a lot of stuff. We lose relationships when we decide to become our most, or really our more authentic self, right? People are disappointed. People can't process who we're becoming or who we are, right? And this isn't to say, right, that, there well, I would say it's important to always understand that, like, when I talk about friends, I mean friends who love me, who can hold my openings or awakenings or expansions, but also who love me enough to give me feedback.
Mhm.
If they see something that I'm doing that maybe isn't aligned with, like, freedom and authenticity, right?
Mhm.
I mean, that's the negotiation piece. I want to be
Yeah.
my most authentic self, but sometimes my most authentic self, or what I think my most authentic self, is actually creating harm for others, and I have to be open to hearing that. Harming and discomfort are two different things.
Right. They've been getting collapsed lately. Just because
Yep.
I'm uncomfortable with something
Yeah.
doesn't mean I'm actually being harmed.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And this is where it gets dicey with
Exactly.
communities because they
Exactly.
conflate those. Like this is
Exactly.
harmful and someone's just living their life.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
when does it, come into our field in a way that's like,
Yeah.
wow, this is pain. Yeah, now it's not,
Yeah.
discomfort. It's moved. This
Yeah.
is where it gets so tricky. This is where no one, I feel like,
Mm.
knows this, how to navigate, because none of us, I don't
Mhm.
believe in
Mm.
communities. I'm
Mhm.
honestly going to say this,
Okay.
have understand these boundaries or understanding.
Yeah.
Yeah, this feels like new for me, Rod.
Well,
This
right,
is
right.
this is like
Yeah.
unexplored territory. What
I
we're
mean,
talking about on some level.
I've lived mostly in intentional communities
Me
with
as
people
well. Yeah.
who were just like, like they were, at, let's just say that like there was a lot going on in some of the communities that I was living in, right? And the thing
Behind the scenes.
behind the scenes, sometimes not
Behind
so
the
much
yeah,
behind the scenes.
shoes behind the door.
But like it was also like this is the thing too, like there are communities where this is a conversation.
Really? I don't know of any that it's yeah, there are some that are it's a conversation, but they always seem to be missing, the abolitionist
Right. Oh,
viewpoint and
absolutely.
the inclusivity and
Yeah.
they're aiming for, let's talk about our sex lives and what we're doing.
Right.
There's
Well,
never seems like
that's
a full expression that we're
right.
trying to aim for.
Yeah. But that's important too, because like we have to so much of this liberation work is naming what we've been told not to name, cutting through that
Mm.
fear. And that's some of the work that I do, right? It's just like I'm just gonna name this. I'm gonna name my relationship to my body, to the parts of my body that I experience pleasure from. And I'm gonna talk about that, because I've been told not to. or I've been told that to talk about certain parts of my experience is too triggering for others, right?
Mm.
Like these are just all the different ways that we were policed around articulating who and what we are and how we experience the world. And so we have to just start naming. You have to start naming where you've been put, right? And all the things that went into you like deciding to stay there. You know, that's healthy community. Like when we can just like show up and put everything on the table and just talk about it. I lived in an activist community where we had all kinds of spaces to have these conversations with each other.
Yeah.
And I lived, I remember one of my earlier communities, we, it was spring and we were going through a really sexual period as a community, you know?
Yeah.
And I mean, it was just like, yeah,
It
it
was
was,
just coming up. It just
yeah,
arises in people's bodies. It's
yeah,
arising in connection, and
you
especially if
know,
there's a loving community where people feel
yeah.
somewhat safe with each other.
Yeah. And I
Mhm.
remember, it was like people were having relationships with one another, sex with one another. And, you know, it was beginning to impact our work that we were doing in community together. Right. And I remember it just got to a point where we just all had to convene and just like sit together and say, okay, what's going on? Because this is out of control now.
Wow.
Yeah, it was getting into
It was crossing
boundary
over. Yeah.
crossing,
Yeah.
in ways that were just really not appropriate. And so we just sat down and named like what's going on. And people were just like, yeah, I'm just like horny. Like it was like people were just putting it out there. It's like I'm just feeling all of this in my body, right? And I don't know why. And I'm living with all these other people whom I'm attracted to,
Mhm.
and it starts getting real complicated. But then you set the space up and you just start talking about it. And we start saying, okay, how can we support each other right now? Because there are needs that are not being met. There are some needs that are being overmet, right? And how do we come back into a balance? And you can't even start that work until you gather and start naming truthfully, honestly, directly what's going on,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
And you
that
put it
takes
out there.
skill. Yeah, well, that's
Yeah.
skillful leadership, and usually it doesn't get to that point till there's it starts hitting the wall, right? It
Mhm.
could ideally, it'd be good to have that conversation before all this stuff starts and have some
Yeah.
kinda but usually it's the aftermath, right? We're picking up the
Mhm.
pieces going, "Oh, I guess maybe we should have talked about this,"
Yeah.
and then it seems like communities often are in the explosion at that point, and I'm glad you were able to rally your
Yes.
community together, but a lot dissolve at that point and
Oh, yeah.
leave in
Yeah.
pain and hurt and
Mhm.
disillusionment,
Yeah.
who was
Yeah.
the leader of the place or,
Yeah.
and then
All of
they're
it. Yeah.
online writing about it, and I mean, this is where we've
It's
gone, right? This
true.
is
It's
the
true.
climate we're living in,
No, absolutely. There's
Maybe a
no lie.
lawyer's involved if they go to
Oh,
some,
absolutely.
high level of hurt and suffering, and maybe there's something there, I don't know.
These are not, just wanna point out, like, these are not hypotheticals. Like,
Right, these are
this
happenings.
this is I'm in conversation with people living through and
Oh
moving through these
god, it makes
very
me
same
so
things.
sad.
Yeah, I mean, and again, it goes back to, like, the cultures that we grew up in. Of course, I'm just gonna just, like, name American, like, culture where it's just like, yeah, we're sex saturated, but not sex positive, and so
Yes,
sex is just, like,
yes.
everywhere, but we can't talk about it, right? You have places like Florida, like, getting rid of all these books around, marginalized identities, and particularly around sex and sexuality on top of
Mhm.
everything else, right? And so you're taking away language
For
from
millions and millions of
millions,
people. Trying to
and
tell them it's
yeah,
wrong to even say these words or talk
exactly,
about their
exactly.
husbands and wives that they're legally married to. I mean,
Yeah,
it's kind of over. Yeah,
okay,
the pendulum is definitely swinging
yeah,
back,
you know,
to
yeah,
some kind of, yeah, we know that part.
and so, like, your earlier question, like, what do we do? So we talked about friends,
Yes, practices, yeah.
practices, reading. I mean, reading, like
Okay, like, I don't know
really,
anything to read that's liberated right now,
I
that's
mean,
cutting edge
whew,
on how
like,
to live this stuff.
I'll tell you what, Samuel Delany, just to throw a name out
Mm,
there, I'm sure I have this book around me somewhere, but I don't wanna interrupt, but to look for it, but, like, his work, as this Black queer man, right?
mhm,
Samuel Delany, for those of you who don't know, is science fiction writer. He's probably maybe in his 80s now, retired. He used to teach at Rutgers. Wrote incredible books exploring sexuality and gender. My favorite book is this like essays called Times Square Red, Times Square Blue. Um, and
mm.
and I just I'm that was the book. I didn't come to that book until maybe graduate school, but that book really, like, cut through a lot of shame,
Mhm,
because Samuel
mhm.
Delany, has just been writing for decades and decades, came up in, like, 60s, 70s, and 80s in New York City, in Manhattan, Times Square, and, for those of you who know anything about the history of Times Square, leading into the 90s, it was just, this place where there's a lot of, like, the sex economy is really strong, and he was a part of that, but he was a part of it in a way that there wasn't shame. It was just like, this is what we did. This is what I did.
Right.
I would go and participate in these spaces and so forth. But the most important part of that book for me is that he just talked about how, our sexuality is policed because it is inconvenient for those who want to maintain power,
Yeah, and
over us.
this is where this interest in us having this two-part series really
Yeah.
comes from. We're trying and we're having these conversations that are about liberation,
Mhm.
and weaving together traditions and streams, and there is something that I think deep down under all the
Mhm.
barrage of societal baggage and shame and trauma and hurt and
Mhm.
abuse, this pure stream of
Mhm.
there is something underneath it
Mhm.
that is awakening. And that's
Mhm.
why the levels of control. I mean, just look at other parts of the world. Women, their bodies, just to even see
Yeah.
their bodies
Yeah.
is dangerous, right? They
Yeah.
can't even or their organs are
Mhm.
mutilated, or, I
Mhm.
mean, we're talking about real oppression here,
Mhm.
and so when you have these groups like in New York, that are exploring, and it's just, yeah, it's dangerous probably to some degree, but liberatory on the other hand, but they're digging, through these
Yeah.
layers. And it might be also connected with craving and lust and
Mhm.
passion. But I do think underneath there's something that we're trying to connect to,
Mhm.
that it has its roots in the divine,
Mhm.
our light in our
Yeah.
hearts.
Yeah.
I think it's like our love, right? We want to
Love,
we
right.
want to feel, feel
Yeah.
this love and this embodiment. And so I keep wanting to cut through to that. And I want to, my way of dealing with being in communities and
Mhm.
Buddhist communities and even creating medicine communities is just like a kind of I was going to say mall cop,
A what?
not a mall cop, but kind of like a
Oh,
sister nun. No one should be touching each other. We all
oh,
have to
yeah.
heal our
Uh-huh.
traumas. This is a non-sexual environment. You feel it, don't act. I'm going kind of like, just feel it in your mind. It's natural. Don't worry. Nothing's bad's going to happen until you cross out of your lane.
Yeah.
And this is not totally working anymore. It's just something that feels like it's reached a plateau with
Yeah.
a kind of celibacy,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
doctrine.
Mhm.
holy
Yeah.
celibacy, not
Holy
not
se
not
Yeah,
sinful celibate,
right.
holy. And we've all gone through that, you
Yeah, yeah,
included, right? Where
totally.
we might need to do that for a
Yeah,
while just to
exactly.
reevaluate how we're using our
Absolutely.
energy.
Absolutely. I think celibacy, refraining from sexual activity is so important for everyone to do, regardless, because this is not about being sex negative. It's really about just going through a period where you have space to be with yourself, right? And to look at where the attention needs to be directed and doing the self-healing, I think is incredible. But it's so interesting too, you bring that up, I was moving along, you know, in terms of like expanding around my embodiment of sexuality, but I wasn't teaching anything though, necessarily. But I listened to a Dharma talk by like a um like a Theravada nun, um, a a white Western Theravada
Mm.
nun who I think we're about the same age, and who just really talked about sexuality, and she was like, "I'm a nun, right? I have vows, but I'm still sexual, like, I still embody sexuality. That doesn't get cut off."
Wow.
And she went through, like, evolutionary theory and like biology and psychology. It was like really such a succinct like talk where she just kind of went through. She reviewed all the science, and got into dharma and the body. And she was like, "Yeah, I don't have sex, but I'm still sexual." And we need to like understand that taking vows or going to celibacy doesn't cut desire off. It doesn't cut like my need to express myself in a way, that feels pleasurable. That doesn't get turned off, right? And that, oh
Right.
my God, that blew me away,
Yeah, you don't
you know?
hear, for those of you who don't know, this is like a more of a conservative
Yeah,
sect,
yeah,
school of Buddhism where,
yeah,
so to have someone speaking like that, it's a sign of the
yeah,
times too, isn't
yeah,
it?
yeah. And then after that, I started teaching, and I mean, I've done a lot, and I partnered with my friend Sange, who was a monk, a Tibetan Buddhist monk at the time, and we started doing because he was queer, is queer. He doesn't hold vows anymore, but he, was like, I met him, and this queer like monk, like in full robes, in full Tibetan robes, right? Like sashaying around, being like sassy and fabulous, and I was just like, "Oh my God," like I'm blown, like it's these monastics, like
Yeah,
literally who were
yeah.
just showing up for me, saying it's like you're they were actually reflecting my rigidity and placing
Exactly.
black
We're like
image.
getting uncomfortable and they're more free than we are and they're in
Yeah.
robes.
I
Yeah.
know. I'm, like, trying to, like, maybe you should tone down, maybe, like, you should
Wow. Yeah.
stop, and so over time, I was like, "Listen, like, I think people need to hear us talk about our relationship to sexuality, you as a renunciate, as a monk, me as, like, just, a regular person out in the world, but both of us being serious Dharma practitioners." And we would do this work, particularly with queer identified communities, it was really beautiful work to have these conversations. But yeah, like it's so much of this is really this intense work of shaking off
Yes, yes,
shame
and
and
I
the
do feel
policing.
like that, and it is confusing and it's hard, and we're like,
Yeah.
"Where is this going?" And it feels dangerous and
Mhm.
traumatic to feel, but you're right, we are, like, cutting through. There is something shaking off to get down to something that's, like, it's at the root that
Yeah.
is, I believe, really deeply sacred.
Yeah. Yeah. This is
I
like
have
absolutely.
I dream that, like, at the core of
Yeah.
this, there's something really, really okay, you
Mhm.
know, not
Mhm.
bad and wrong and, and I'm cutting through my own. It's really easy for a lot of people to come into community and be like, "Oh, I'm sex positive," but they still
Mm.
have all these biases. You're going to encounter
That's
them if you're being truthful here, folks. You're
a
going to encounter
whole,
your pastor's message in your head you grew up listening, or your grandmother,
yeah,
or grandfather, or wherever religion or God of
yeah,
origin you connect with. You're gonna you feel that you're gonna hit it. You're gonna hit
yeah,
it. All of the
yeah,
tangles.
yeah,
It's hard to do
yeah,
that, to feel that and not feel like you're going down a bad road when you're
right.
reclaiming this.
It feels very lonely.
Yes, the loneliness. Yeah, and
Mhm,
exactly. And
mhm,
it's hard to comfort people.
yeah,
It's kind of like for a while they just have to walk, and the
yeah,
reclaiming is, you know, part of
yeah,
it. But I hope these conversations are helpful to people to be like, we're
yeah,
with you,
yeah,
we're going there. And, we're going there, I'll say for me, with a very sincere heart. As a healer, I
yeah,
deeply care.
mhm,
And this is part of our human embodiment. It's
yeah,
not the place we can take a jump and bypass anymore. Look what's going on. And then
right,
the bypassing, there is no bypass. It just
yeah,
erupts.
yeah,
It's an eruption all the time when we don't talk openly
yeah,
and don't name these things. These are all these communities just going
mhm,
down in flames of lies and deceit, and mostly hidden,
mhm,
hidden, right?
mhm, yeah,
Secrets.
yeah,
Everyone's
secret,
holding secrets, and then they all come
yeah,
out in these Hulu documentaries and everyone's
yeah,
crying.
yeah,
I get it, but
yeah,
like we got to learn.
yeah. And again, it's like we have to really resist or disrupt the ways our sexuality has been labeled dangerous or shameful.
Yes.
And of course
Yes.
for me, I think for both of us kind of growing up in like kind of a Christian environment, or you weren't necessarily Christian
I
growing
grew up
up.
on my father's side. Oh yeah.
Yeah,
I
it's
mean, they
like,
were
yeah.
Baptists,
Mhm.
all of them.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and we grew up with
Yeah.
that, like, shame of, like, body. Of course, that all comes from theology, right? The body is impure, we're born
And a
sinners,
woman's body is
a woman's body.
particularly, we're just
Yeah,
like dirty,
yeah,
and
yeah. The misogyny, right, of,
yeah.
like, this kinda patrilineal kinda theology, which is dominates the world right now. Like, we have to disrupt that, and this is why Dharma was really important for me, because I didn't feel like that burden was there, right? And
Mhm.
again, like, always having to name as a cisgender person, a cisgender male, right? Yeah, like, patriarchy in a way favors me, but being queer, right? That the queerness always was like this thing that was like fighting against patriarchy, saying, actually, no, like,
Oh.
I still like, this still doesn't suit me. This still doesn't, like, want me to be free, right? At the same time. So that kind of commitment to embodying sexuality is really a commitment to like this kind of anti-capitalist, anti-patriarchal kind of way of being, you
Yes.
know? Where for me it's meant, okay, how has the fulfillment of my needs been normalized, right?
Mm.
And how do I begin to bring awareness to the space that I take up, to the assumptions that I make, right? And I'm always making assumptions. This is like this is the issue. Like, I've probably made many assumptions already in these talks, but like, how do I begin to bring awareness to all of this and start beginning to ask, okay, what do other people need? Right? And I brought that ethic, right, into sex, right, with other men, right? Where I was like, okay, how to begin to think about what others need really begins to be a practice of compassion, actually. Like, I recognize what I'm experiencing, I recognize maybe what the other person is experiencing. Then I say, okay, how can we both have a pleasurable, liberating experience? And what can I do to decenter what I need, but not get rid of what I need? Like, this is why we're doing it. I want to have fun. And two,
Yeah.
I also want my partner to have fun. And this is why you do basic things like communicate and negotiate. which seems much more like formal and heavy when you talk about it, but it can be a very quick thing in the moment. It's like, you know, what do you get off on? Okay, this is what I get off on. This is what I don't like. Okay, this is, you go back and forth like that. You get this
Right.
place where you're like, okay, this is where we can play. You're setting up the perimeters so you can both enter into this space of play and pleasure, right? Where your concern for what someone needs has created this space, right? And then if you have that kind of ethic, then like sex becomes that's when it starts becoming liberatory, right? Instead of
Yeah.
me coming in saying, okay, I have my needs, I don't care what you're trying to get. I'm definitely gonna leave this experience getting what I need. And if you get what you need, fine, whatever. But like that, the tenderness, the care, the compassion that we begin to bring into sexual relationships, like that's the key, the beginning
Yes.
of liberatory sexuality, or particularly liberatory sex,
Yeah.
more particularly,
Without
right?
all of the patriarchal energies coming with the baggage and the programs, or at least they're there, but we
They're
can
there,
cut
yeah.
through them.
Yeah,
We're
like,
there, but we can talk
yeah,
it out.
you can hold it,
You can hold it and
and
not try to be under the influence, you
this was
know.
such an early Dharma teaching for me from Thich Nhat Hanh, you
He was very
know
sex positive, I felt, Thich
Yeah,
Nhat Hanh. I always felt this
yeah,
incredible, love for how he would express, even though he was a monk his
yeah.
entire life, but he would
Mm,
talk about falling in love. I remember
mm,
a beautiful story, he
mm,
fell in love with this nun one time. It's like she
yeah.
walked in, I was I was done. She had me,
Yeah,
he watched her and it was, and something so sweet, it's our humanness,
it's
right?
humanness. Yeah, it happens, right? And you hold it. That's what he taught me. It was like, whatever arises, arises. But the point is, like, what's your relationship with it?
Yeah,
Are you taking care of it? Are you tending to it? Um,
absolutely. And
yeah.
I think like us having these and to all the listeners, we really just wanted to include this
Mhm.
because these conversations get left out. We talk
Yeah.
all about this practice and all about that practice. So,
Mhm.
as we start to move toward the end of the
Yeah.
conversation, we know it's not the end,
Yep.
but it's the beginning of
Right.
a new paradigm, I mean, it's
Mm,
old, we're going back to the old, something old,
mhm,
these ways of liberation and using energy and light and love and
mhm,
compassion and emptiness,
mhm.
that we don't have to get too deep into that part. Maybe at some point we can, but I just thank you for your openness, your open mind and open heart and open system and your willingness to, um, I don't know, you just go first on a lie. You jump, then we jump, and you're jumping behind other people who have jumped.
Yeah,
James Baldwin
exactly.
jumped and all,
Right,
we're in a
right.
long line,
Yep.
but there's
Mhm,
something about your openness to the
mhm,
exploration being that have all of these practices, you're holding, the seat of the teacher and,
mhm,
and together we're trying to explore community and,
mhm,
this gets
mhm,
complicated,
mhm,
everybody, working with practices and
mhm.
our humanness and plant
Yeah,
medicine
yeah,
and
yeah,
creating safety and
yeah,
also liberation. This is
yeah,
it's like a dance, and
yeah,
we're learning it as we go.
yeah. I appreciate that really deeply, and I would just encourage people, like, yeah, this seems like a lot, um, but you have to get back for me, it's just like getting back to my personal ethic and
Yeah,
goal in life, like, that's where everything is rooted. My ethic is to reduce harm,
yeah, yeah,
right? And my goal is to get free, to obtain complete awakening, right? Like, you have to get clear, you have to get really clear about, like, what it is that you're doing in life, and then build from there. And so I can take this ethic, you take this ethic into everything, from shopping at the grocery store to walking down the street to having conversations with friends, especially right into embodying, healthy or sacred sexuality and having like liberatory sex and relationships, whatever it may be for you, right? Like that's the ethic you're always coming back to. Like no matter what I'm doing, is this like actually like reducing harm, and is this going to get me or someone else freer? From the
Absolutely.
causes and conditions of suffering, right? And that's incredibly important. That's incredibly important for us to embody this because I realize that like in order for me not to do the same bullshit mistakes that my
Mhm.
teachers have made
Mhm.
and maybe continue to make, I have to actually make a different choice about how I'm showing up, and I need to show up as whole as possible, right? And so, like, you have to see everything like this, and like, yeah, there are things that are personal and private, absolutely, but like my life, like you have to see the totality and the complexity of my life, right? Because I don't want something to be in the shadows, which will create a kind of reactivity, which puts people in danger,
Right. We
you
have to be
know?
very transparent now. This is
Yeah,
like, let's be like
have to.
cellophane right now. It's
I mean,
open, you know?
and I made a choice to get very detailed about like my sexuality and gender expression and how I make choices to get needs met. Like I've had to get very, very, very clear and detailed, Like I wrote a whole chapter about my sex life and New Saint. I'm not in New Saints, but in my last book, Love and Rage. And it was just like it wasn't a big deal, right? Until I had to read the audiobook,
And then you're like, yeah,
and then
exactly. You're
yeah,
like, oh my God.
and my sister was like the audio engineer for my last book, because she's an audio engineer, and I was like, "Oh, like, I'm talking about my sex life," and she was like, "Yeah, you are." You know?
Exactly. I mean, I'm always like shocked
Yeah,
and also so in awe. And then I admire it because I know there's something that is so important about it. And so that's why
yeah,
I say you're always willing to jump, and be in those moments of discomfort of your sisters reading it along with you or your mom or whoever
everyone that I
yeah, the
know.
world, and they will continue to read it long after you're gone from this realm, and
Yeah,
they will, it will help them to make sense of their
yeah,
own experiences and
yeah,
their own lives, and
mhm,
and I think that that's really key is
yeah,
to like, I don't wanna ignore this anymore because what we're doing does not work. Lord, look at all these
mhm,
communities. It is just a train wreck, and these are
mhm,
all leaders who started off
yeah,
with really noble intentions,
mhm,
really on the path. I do
mhm,
believe that. I do believe underneath all of it, people started off with the right motivation, and then
mhm.
somehow, they lost their way. I'll just say that they lost their way.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
and I think, it's so much about how we're not allowed to show up
mm,
completely, and if we don't show up completely, there will be parts of our expressions that will be, as I often used to say, uninterrogated,
right.
So they're just these unconscious things now, but we have a public persona, but you have this shadow that also needs to be tended to,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
held,
and you got
you
it.
know?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's hard to come out in front of a group of people who have this one understanding of you and to say, you know what, actually, there's this other piece of me, But if they have the same shame, right, then like they can weaponize that shame against you if you decide to speak about certain things. And there are many examples like that, particularly with spiritual leaders, where they've been like, you know what, I can't hide my sexuality or I can't hide a certain belief,
Right.
anymore, and, like, the consequences that come with that, you know? Um, but yeah, but of course, this conversation, there's more to say as well.
I know. I mean, you got 2 juicy hours, folks, and, you might want more. At some point,
Yeah,
we'll have a round 2, a
we'll
round
see. We'll
3, a
see.
round 100, I'm sure, as we're evolving ourselves here
Yeah.
on these topics, and we're, understanding more and more as we go. It's more, everything's awakening, and we're understanding that our community, all of these communities, they want to understand themselves. They want to
Mhm.
understand this. They want to get it right. They want to heal. They want to liberate. And so I just feel like it's a new time. Maybe it's every generation bangs on the door,
Mhm. Mhm.
from the 50s to the 60s to
Yeah,
every generation they're just pushing more and more
yeah,
to ultimate freedom of
yeah,
the a state where we're just cutting through
yeah,
all this programming and we're
yeah,
really who we are and we're free
yeah,
and we're expressing. And
yeah,
hopefully, I believe that does not have to create a danger, that does not have to involve harm, that could involve deep love, respect, and clear boundaries and communication. And so I'm
yeah.
glad. I'm really I have a lot of gratitude for this conversation, both of
Mhm.
our part 1 and part
Yeah,
2.
me too, and thank you for your willingness
Yeah,
to
well, I
do
feel
this.
like in
I
a
know
way
it's
I was
not easy.
interviewing you more, so it's kind of easier, but
I noticed
I'm
that,
pulled into it though, of course.
but you have to take your time.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I've been doing this for years now, so it's like this is like almost a second language, but we all have to take our time, and that's why I want to like just kind of leave with our listeners, right? It's just like you have to start somewhere.
Yes,
The
you
children
have
would
to
say,
start
"Start where you're
somewhere
at,"
with
you know?
this.
And it
Yes.
may be awkward, you may it may not be using the right language, whatever, but just start,
Yeah.
and, again, just get with friends and people who love you, and start exploring and start helping, or start creating spaces where, like, you can experiment with people, that hold the integrity of this
And
work.
telling our stories about,
Yeah, exactly.
I think getting together and telling our stories with our friends about
Yeah,
where we've been, where we
yeah,
wanna go, who we
yeah,
are,
yeah,
to try to,
yeah,
reveal the deeper levels of truth, to see ourselves and like you said, with your friends.
yeah.
Um, so yes, and if you wanna read Lama Rod's chapter in Love and Rage, you
Mhm.
can find it. That's out there. My
Yep.
books are much more I go around the topic, so but there's
Not for the
other
next
stuff
book.
there,
You're gonna
but
go right into it for the next book, right?
yeah, yeah, you're steering the ship right into you're steering it where it needs to go,
Yeah. Yep.
and that's what healers do.
Mhm.
That's what we do. That's what teachers do.
Yeah,
They're willing to
exactly.
tackle it.
Yeah.
So yes. All right, everybody. Well, we give thanks to all of you listeners for supporting our podcast.
Absolutely.
And
Mhm.
yes, we'll be recording more episodes coming up here. So thank you so much,
Mhm.
everybody. And that's all for now.
Alright.
Years and years under